Thank you so much for being here with us this morning, everyone. As most of you know, this panel will be around tech transfer, how to avoid the sort of pitfalls of many companies that have spun out from the technology transfer offices or academic spinouts or other research organizations. With us today here is a great panel of experts that I'd love to invite to introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Pablo. You're very well surrounded today.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much for the invite. I'm Pablo Prieto. I manage a early stage fund based in Barcelona called CE Health Ventures. We're a family office backed that invests both in Europe and in the US, mostly in health tech and in digital.
Thank you everyone for being here. I'm Beatriz Volckaert, part of the Philips Ventures team, the venture arm of Philips. We invest mainly in medtech and digital health companies that are aligned with our business unit that ranges from consumer health-oriented products to precision diagnosis, image-guided therapy, monitoring, or enterprise informatics. It's our pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Gina Melchner and I'm a venture partner with NLC Health Ventures. Now, for those of you who don't know NLC, let me just say we're not a venture capital fund. We're actually a venture builder, a venture studio, as it's often called, meaning we're the founder, co-founder in all of our ventures and work very closely with the tech transfer offices, which is, of course, why I'm hoping to share some experience with you today.
Thank you. My name is Tatiana Lobanov-Rostovsky. I'm here as part of Oxford Science Enterprises. We're an independent $1 billion fund structured as an investment company. We work very closely with the tech transfer office with Oxford University. We have a unique partnership with them where we get an early look into the exciting innovation that's happening within Oxford.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. I'm Nadin Youssef. I'm a senior analyst at Nina Capital. We are a early stage venture capital fund specialist in health tech. And we're based in Barcelona, but of course we have quite a global mission and perspective as well. Amazing. Gina, I'd love to start with you. Given your background, what have you seen that are the sort of key attributes that you look for when you're first, engaging with these tech transfer offices and they're sort of introducing you to these commercial opportunities that could be possible? So, what are those key attributes that you're looking for?
So this is an interesting one because we, of course, look at a lot of things throughout our due diligence process, but the first thing I'd look at is always, is there a need? And this is something that we see a lot working with tech coming out of academia, is that a lot of it is really based more on tech push. Definitely not all of it. There's a lot of good stuff out there that is really starting with the problem and solving for that. But we do see tech push, so technologies that are brilliant tech, but not always aligned with the problem that we actually see in the market. So that's something that I put a lot of focus on in the beginning.
Amazing. Okay, and how about you, Beatriz, in terms of coming from Philips Ventures and coming from the sort of more corporate side, when you've had the chance to look at these types of commercial opportunities, what are the key attributes that you're looking for from your end?
Yeah, I would say that it's essential to understand what the current technology cannot solve nowadays and what the solution can provide to hospitals, to patients. Sometimes those technologies need to look at it from the need and try to see how the final customer will be willing to adopt, why a physician would like to change their practice, their current practice, and at the end their standard of care. The most successful companies are the ones that are changing the dynamics of the market. So I would say focusing on the need and who will be adopting this technology is essential. And of course, another thing that for all of us is essential is that the team is balanced. That you have the great know-how internally, the domain expertise, and that there's this successful management team to succeed.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting that you've touched on that team element particularly from our perspective at Nina. I think we sometimes see a gap within these spin-outs or commercial opportunities that have spun out from these academic institutions, in terms that they can sometimes be led by an academic, which then unfortunately creates a gap in the commercial sense. Tatiana, I'd love to ask you, coming from your perspective from the Oxford Science Enterprises, great ideas can sometimes get stuck in academia or in these institutions. And so how do you think this can be avoided?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, so one of the ways that we try and avoid great ideas getting stuck within academia is a very early signposting to the academics within the university that we are not only separate from the tech transfer office, but we can help craft their vision and story into something that could be a company one day. So that's part of it. I think there's definitely an education process within academia that, perhaps it's a bit of a legacy factor that commercial is part of kind of the dark side, and us as investors are, again, part of the dark side, but it's really part of that education to encourage that if they would like that technology to reach scale and reach as many patients as possible, that we're really here to help facilitate that. So we really work hard through those kind of mechanisms to help.
And just in light of that, how do you engage with investors? And you mentioned the dark side. Do you feel that there's a friction between these sort of freshly spun out companies and investors, or do you think that there's a way that they can both align?
I think it's key in what you said of aligning, right? I think it's all about putting our respective best foots forward and really promoting the strengths of what an investor can bring to the table. Touching on thinking about a founding team, for example, if we position ourselves and really have a knowledge sharing exercise, we can demonstrate ourselves as great partners to help bolster commercial parts of a business, acknowledging that they have that clinical side and really just help thinking about building the company and the team together. So it's really trying to, I guess, dispel that perhaps legacy view of what investors might be.
Okay, and I feel like we're sort of going through the negative end, but I also wanted to sort of touch on how do investors, VCs, or the other shapes and forms that they come in, how do they benefit from these spin-outs or from engaging with these tech transfer offices? For me, I feel like there's a lot of sort of horizon scanning, for example, that these investors could be benefiting from. But are there any other sort of attributes that you think that there's a reason that investors should always keep an eye out in these types of companies or spin-outs? Pablo, let's go with you.
Sure. So the most obvious one is that at least we share the vision with you that investing early can produce better returns. Not only that, you can get a lot of new technologies, which are, I'm going to say, they're almost like lateral thinking into existing problems. So I'm going to give an example. Someone that is innovating in a hospital will probably solve existing problems in hospitals. But if you're trying to solve future problems in hospitals that are not actual very, very material to that hospital right now, that innovation is likely to come from other places like academia. And so that means that making the bet in someone who has that kind of talent, that kind of technology, usually pays off big time. Yes, okay, there is a big failure rate attached to this. But as investors, if you understand that kind of risk, if you adopt it inside your investment thesis, it can be very rewarding. You're at the forefront, as you were saying, at the horizon of new problems. And for us, that's very fulfilling, and it also meets the financial requirements that any fund has. So for me, when you get a company on Series B, Series C, where they already showed that they have some commercial traction, the product is almost finished and so on, are they going to be solving a problem? Yes, most likely. Is it going to be a good investment? Yeah, most likely. But then, okay, I could be investing in commodities too and public equity, but that's not what we like. I think every single fund has their taste. So I think that's and for earlier stage investors, we like the thrill of new technologies, as you were saying, and we like the thrill of having discussions about what are the regulatory hurdles, the go-to-market hurdles, etc. That's my cup of tea, at least.
Anyone else, perhaps more on this sort of, the positive outcomes that could bring between the engagement of these types of investors and the transfer technology offices or the spin-outs?
I mean, I think we're operating in a very, very tricky space, right?
Yeah.
It's basically right in that valley of death. It's there's a lot of need in the early stage. We see a lot of players pulling out of the early stage. So I think it's more important than ever that we really collaborate in the ecosystem and make sure that we're bridging those gaps. And the tech transfer offices are a big part of that. I mean, they see so much innovation and there's so much more out there that doesn't make it into startups. And I think we all have a role to play to really build that ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think that the ecosystem is maturing quite a lot, right? Like now we're seeing many tech transfers, like also like not just focusing on the, like getting the equity, but trying to build their offices for success, right? And their commerce for success. And well, this has been transitioning from, and maybe copying from the US, right? But on a positive note.
And just picking up on that point, something that we've seen within the Oxford ecosystem that we've been really trying to help bolster is working closely with the tech transfer office for things like express licensing, so helping the process go a bit faster. So that helps not only the academics, but also us on the investor side. So there are different mechanisms that can definitely help align everyone's interests.
And do you think these are you're seeing them more frequently, more commonly, or do you feel like it's still sort of somewhat traditional in the sense of, Oxford perhaps is one step ahead of everyone else?
Well, perhaps I can't comment on other ecosystems, maybe. I don't know what you guys see.
Well, I mean, we see a lot of diversity in the ecosystem, right? We work with tech transfer across Europe and in the US, and you have some that are very commercially minded, like Oxford, for example, like the Mayo Clinic, whom we collaborate with as well in the US. And then you see the other end of the spectrum, where it's really about the number of licensing deals and the bureaucratic process that's in place, and there's no real commercial sense and understanding of the startup scene. And that's difficult to deal with, but it's also an education piece on our part, of course.
Amazing. And so just on that note, Gina, what do you think they should be doing differently to better the conditions of these commercial opportunities?
It's hard to say because it's a mentality thing almost. You really need to get the right people connected that know how startups work and understand the commercial components. So as an example, we see a lot of tech transfer offices that want to charge large lump sum payments to the startups for the IP. And in the fragile state that the startups are in the beginning, if they need to pay the university even a small amount of money in the beginning, it makes it that much harder for them to find investment and time. And it's not beneficial to the university in the long run either, because the startups might not make it.
Yeah.
I mean, for people in the tech transfer industry, the Cohen-Boyer patents way back then for monoclonal antibodies are the prime example of why you shouldn't squeeze too hard, both in terms of lump sums or taking, positions in their cap table that are going to squeeze out other early stage investors like myself. I'm always very wary that if you're licensing your technology, it's great. You got your license, you got backup from the academic institution, but if they're taking 25% of the company, well, that's going to be making me a little bit wary. Where's the value? The value was already at the initial work that was licensed. So hopefully there are other mechanisms for compensation. But I fully agree that this has improved a lot. Maybe the American model has helped a little bit more. And hopefully in the future, I believe now that a lot of the academic institutions have this remit of making an impact in society, not only by fostering innovation or providing care in the case of hospitals, but rather to making sure that those innovations reach commercial stages, because otherwise the impact will never be measured, right? So if you're fostering innovation, you're doing a lot of patents and so on, but those innovations never reach society. They're not fulfilling their mission, are they?
Yeah, and on this note, maybe like, I feel like they should act a bit more as mentors for the companies and try to open up the network and, like be those kind of like board members, right, for those companies. And I feel like this is also important.
Amazing. And from your end, Tatiana, what do you think is perhaps, how can they better the incentives to I think there's also perhaps a gap, particularly in the UK or in Europe, in contrast to the US, where I think the incentives are slightly more aligned towards the innovator or the inventor wanting to spin out technologies. How do you think they could improve or better align those incentives in the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think touching on what Pablo mentioned earlier, the European ecosystem in terms of aligning incentives, let's say, compared to the US, it's come a long way, and it's definitely moving in a positive direction. It's not perfect by any means, but it's, like I said, like hopefully moving within the right direction. I think naturally there is a complication that within the UK, universities have more public funding, and there's more relationship within that to grants, etc., whereas the US is very much more of a private closed system. So I think that perhaps that's also where that dissonance comes from. I think ultimately the best way to help align incentives is to really be able to transfer that vision of getting a technology to patients. That could be through means of ensuring founders are aligned through cap table, or working closely with them throughout the university and looking at different opportunities that they might have as well. I think ultimately academics are vision driven, and they would like to see their idea get to scale. So there are lots of different factors at play.
Interesting. And you mentioned, Tatiana, you just mentioned incentives, but I wanted to also ask Beatriz, what about partnerships? And coming from that corporate side, how do you think that partnerships could, for example, also support the sort of tech transfer from academia into the market?
Yeah, I think that, of course, like engaging early in the days with strategics, corporates, the industry is essential. I don't know, like the perspective that, like someone that is right there with the customers can provide and do this trial error right at the beginning, not just for the startup and for the spin out and, like checking the needs, but also like how others will perceive this company with this validation is key. So I think it is essential.
Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, amazing. And then I guess one other point, we keep touching on what the TTOs can do or what the institutions can do, but what about what VC investors could do, right? And so, Pablo, over to you. What do you think, should these investors do at these early stages of development when they're engaging with the TTOs to really also foster that innovative environment and help them make it through to the market?
Well, when you're so early in a venture, first of all, you always need to have a plan and know that plan is never going to come to fruition. There's going to be detours, there's going to be bumps, stops, whatever you want to call it. But you need to have a plan, and you need to be able to demonstrate to your early investors that you are meeting those milestones within time and budget. I think what I'm saying sounds pretty obvious to someone coming from corporates and from other walks of life. But for academics, sometimes they have a little bit more, they can flex their muscles in terms of time and financing. When you're in business, no longer you have that luxury, especially if you're taking money from the outside. So for early stage investors, I think we need to help them craft that plan, make achievable milestones, and have an equity story behind it. So if you're in a pre-seed stage, you want to make sure that you're going to be hitting milestones that at seed stage, seed funds are going to find attractive. Attractive in which way? Well, maybe de-risking the technology, maybe advancing regulatory, maybe solidifying the IP position, maybe building the team. I mean, there's a number of things there that will need to happen. And I think the job that both Tatiana and Gina are doing with very early innovators is crafting those plans. And then as an investor, when I receive those plans need to be credible and need to be aligned. So this kind of communication happens more often than not. So, but I would say plan, and then acknowledge that the plan will not be met at some point.
So holding on to that expectation that the plan always can sometimes change, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think one of the things as well that Pablo you've mentioned earlier to me was also about the governance structures and how sometimes governance can be tricky for these spin-outs. So what do you think would be the best sort of way for them to manage this?
Yeah. So I have a couple of nightmare stories where technology was in license from academic institutions, and those academic institutions had veto power in the board about who came on board as investors or as partners, for instance. So they don't want to collaborate with the strategics right away. They're like, what are you talking about? This is the best ever. You have a very early stage technology, you have a strategic that is interested, what's not to like here? But they had veto power and didn't want to go with a strategic. So those kind of situations make me as an investor very edgy. You don't want that. I mean, who should have veto power? I mean, I'm not going to go extensively in this, but there's sometimes in technology transfer agreements clauses that damage your business down the line. So I think you need to be very wary about whether you let your academic institution take a board seat, and if so, under which conditions. There should probably be a time cap or a milestone cap, whatever you want to do. You need to work out those provisions so they don't basically hijack your technology, because at the end of the day, the company is no longer part of the academic institution. It's an entity on its own. It has its own governance and its own shareholder agreements, let's face it.
Maybe to add on to that, you were talking about horror stories. We've definitely had our share as well. And it can be things as simple as slowing down the venture because the university simply isn't set up to move quickly. But as a shareholder, if you do insist on equity in the company, you have obligations as a shareholder as well. And if it takes you 3 months to answer an email, which is the case for some of the horror stories, then it also doesn't make sense to take a shareholder position or even a board position. And there's certainly universities who are great at this, and they know how to be shareholders, and they're very supportive, and they add value. But there are others who don't, and not all of them need to play that role.
Good. Yeah.
I think education is also one of the things that VC investors on their end should be engaging with these TTOs to really show them the impact that they could have at these very early stages of these companies, right? And so I think, there's something to reflect there on as investors on how to do that. I don't know, what other, I guess the other thing I wanted to also comment on that we've mentioned is really, we've mentioned in the incentives, we've mentioned this sort of governance structure, as well as how industry partnerships can also really help foster that innovative environment and ambience in these academic institutions. But what about, who they're surrounding themselves with? And maybe let's just touch a bit more on that team element, because from my experiences, from Nina Capital, a lot of the times that I get pitched by these spin-outs, it's almost, a pitch deck is almost like their thesis. It's just their whole PhD is in a deck. And so that then sort of signals to me that the team perhaps is not thinking as commercially as I'd like them to think. And so I'd wanted to hear from everyone here sort of any experiences they've had with those teams and how you've navigated. I know from our end, some of our portfolio companies that were spin outs, for example, Early Sight, how do we navigate, helping them make a team that is both scientifically strong, technologically strong, but also commercially strong, and I always feel that there's some of that friction there. So,
I think that when someone comes from academia or even like a spin-out from a corporate, right? Like from a corporate, you need to change the mentality and have some sort of restructuring or some sort of new mentality upon this, right? Because otherwise you might take some things from the past, and you need to act as a startup per se, right?
Yeah.
Some cases we had this, right, like the co-founders, and they were so in love with the idea and kind of like a bit focused on their niche, that this wasn't working, right? And after some time, well, you realize you try to mentor, but if not, changes are always good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to touch on that, we've definitely seen like some flavor of very academic-led opportunities. I think we've put in some unique parts of the infrastructure to help facilitate that commercial thinking as early as possible.
Yeah.
So, for example, one of our sourcing strategies, we have entrepreneurs and residents who ferret around departments, meet with academics who would like to have a spin out, but they acknowledge early that they would just like to be involved in more of a fractional sense, or often the university have commitments of what other work they can do alongside their academic role. So we have our EIRs work closely with them to think about what a company could look like, in which, again, you can build like a really strong commercial team around them, and they can have their role still with giving strong clinical expertise, but trying to build not only that strong team around them, but also very early go-to-market commercial thinking to avoid them going out to market with more of a naive sense of what a business would look like. There's another mechanism actually within Oxford, but it's connected more to the university, called Venture Scouts, and they're also trying to do this early, uncovering and helping more of this commercial thinking happening earlier and earlier.
Okay, interesting. Gina, anything else on that?
Yeah, I think for me, it's the best founders I see out there are the ones who realize what they don't know and can then specifically surround themselves with expertise to compensate that. Bring in the team members, the advisors, the investors who can compensate for the things that you don't know or you don't have experience with. I mean, it's very natural for an academic founder who's doing this for the first time to not understand the commercial side. You know, what you're good at is the deep tech and science behind it. And that's a great thing, and no one knows it all, but really being honest with yourself about what expertise you need to bring in is massively helpful to these startups.
Very interesting.
It's for me, I'm going to give the perspective that for me, unless the team is well conformed, is a no-go. I mean, every single person that is in the investment community will tell you you invest mostly on teams. You can have the best technology. If it's not distributed properly, it's not going to make it to the market successfully. And that's 99%, I would say, team effort. And so you need to have a team that is driven in that regard. So when I look at very early ventures, yes, an academic founder who is obsessed with becoming the CIO, maybe because he has this funny idea that being a CIO is pretty cool. I've started 3 companies. It's not really, and when you're that early is stressful to say the least. But there is no romanticism about it, but they sometimes have this romantic idea and will not let go. So I agree with Gina. Academic founders who acknowledge this is my forte and my strength and are surrounded by advisors and so on, it's important, but I will go one step beyond. You need to be able to attract people to your team. And that level of charisma is something that is quite extraordinary and really makes the cut for me. So someone that not only acknowledges I'm outside my depth here, looking at what's the go-to-market strategy in such and such market, but that can actually attract people to the team to work with them in that regard. Not necessarily advisors. I think everybody with some money can pay for an external advice and things like that, but to actually attract and engage people that are experienced. I think that's something that it's on my playbook. The other thing that I've done is I acquired the habit of having a list of potential team members for early startups. And so whenever there's a match in personalities, I will at least try to make the connection. Why? Because unless you conform that team, most of these super early stage companies are non-investable for me. Unless they're coming from incubators.
Then send them to us, we'll help out.
Incubators, yes, exactly.
And just on that incubator point, in addition to the team, Gina, what other things do you think they struggle with the most when you've seen this prototype of?
I mean, being in a startup is very, very different from being in academia.
Yeah.
It's a constant roller coaster. The speed is completely different.
Yeah.
And not everyone's suited to it, and that's okay. Not everyone needs to be an entrepreneur, and that's of course why we're here, and why you're here as well. Is we really need to help fill that gap, and help the entrepreneurs that are suited to being entrepreneurs to really become that and to surround themselves with the right people, but also show the ones who aren't that there is another pathway for their invention to make an impact.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really interesting because another thing I've noticed is, well, during my time at Imperial College, I would be fascinated by the fact that tech transfer not only happened from academia into the market, but even happened internally between departments. So I would see, for example, a lab in the sort of bioengineering space that had taken the technology from the automotive space, so from the electrical engineers in that department, and they were reapplying it to what could be its application in healthcare. I found that fascinating. But the other thing I noticed as well in relation to that was that when these academics were, patenting innovations, I often see that it is of value, but they often come out looking for a problem, not that they were born from a specific problem. And so I think that's something key. And so what is the work that they can do at those early stages? Because by the time I see them, they've quit their jobs. Some of them are now full-time, and it's a great technology, but they're still searching where it can be applied. Yeah. And so what are the things we would recommend? Pablo, let's begin with you on how that could be avoided. How do you avoid being a solution looking for a problem?
I think you need to iterate a fair amount to find your equity story. I was speaking this morning to a company who has really cool technology. It started on a market. And the first feedback that I said is, and they were well along the development, I said, look, this is great technology. You're just in the wrong market. And, I don't need to say it myself, he has been pitching for a whole year. He hasn't been able to raise. And now he discovered his technology can be applied in another market, and all of a sudden everybody's interested. So I think there is a lesson to be learned there. And that is, in order to raise capital for a startup, you need to have a solid equity story that resonates. And all investors, we're looking roughly for the same thing, a substantial market or a very significant transformational technology that will shape up the market in a different way, and a team that can deliver. Okay, so this guy was very resilient 1 year, but it took him 1 year to find his equity story. Yeah. So the suggestion that I would have for anyone facing this is, even before you start raising, try to pitch different angles to early stage investors or even later stage investors or incumbents to see where is this actually sticking. Because if it's not sticking, it's not worth quitting your job.
Yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice. Anyone else have any other pieces of advice, perhaps, on how to avoid being the solution looking for the problem?
I would say focus on the need, but the most important part is also how are you gonna monetize it at the end? Yeah. And then this part of trying to do those early stage pilots or trying to check in with the industry, with the patients, with those hospitals, with those physicians right at the beginning, and checking if they will be willing to pay for it. Yeah. is the key part.
Yeah. And I think that's actually very interesting that you pointed that out, because I feel like there's a responsibility within the institution to let the spin out do that market research, right? So you mentioned, for example, early stage pilots. A lot of the academic institutions have hospitals that are attached to them. So also maybe facilitating, right, the transfer of that technology to be piloted or tested out in that as a sort of maybe launch pad is also an interesting thing that I think, institutions should definitely be pushing for. Mm-hmm. All right, amazing.
I mean, to that end, we could learn from new trends in the U.S. So first of all, in the U.S., a lot of hospitals right now, they're raising their own funds, innovation funds. Yeah. And second, there is a new model also that is happening both in Israel and in the U.S., which is services for equity. So you become automatically, the hospital becomes a shareholder of yours, but they commit to purchasing the services of the startup early on. And that gives a scalability and proof of, let's say, clinical usefulness without the necessity of going into very complicated clinical trials, etc. So just being actually on the environment where your solution will be deployed in the future. And, you know, you need to see it case by case, but I think I would be very comfortable with a hospital sitting on the board if they're going to be committed to, you know, expanding your product and helping you develop it further down the line. So, again, ideas.
Yeah. No, that's great. And actually, I wasn't aware of that model that was happening in both the services for equity. I think that's a interesting way to go about it.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right. And so I guess for the sort of last question I wanted to ask all of you is, and we can start with you, is in one word, you know, what do you think inventors must get right to properly transition between invention and a commercial product?
It's hard in one word, but okay, let me try. I'm going to have a couple words, but
Go for it.
some kind of early thinking on go-to-market and commercial.
Okay. Go to market and commercial. Gina?
One word is indeed hard. Yeah, I think there's so many things, but maybe you can wrap it up into opportunity. You really, really need to understand your opportunity, both from a clinical impact angle as well as from a financial angle, because if you don't understand your opportunity, then you're not going to be able to sell it to an investor either.
Beatriz?
I would say, yeah, focus on the need and try to find the how to make business out of it.
Okay, so for being, again, I guess that would be more being a proper solution to a need, so being need-driven, and then commercial. Mm-hmm. Amazing. And then Pablo?
I was hoping you wouldn't go all the way down to the line because it's hard to add to what has been said. I'm going to go a slightly different direction. So there is a significant evidence from Pittsburgh and so on that the valuation of companies is significantly higher the more IP is behind it. So very often you find a lot of startups that come with a single patent application, and there is a wealth of knowledge behind that application, but there is only a single application. For whatever reason, the technology transfer offer didn't have any more money to do any more applications or whatever it was. So I'm going to say try to build as much IP, because honestly, for your pre-money valuation in your first round, the more patents you have, the higher your valuation is going to be, because the higher is going to be your defensibility. Yes, the opportunity needs to be there, commercial, etc. Yeah, but I had to say something different, so I'm going to say IP.
I think that was actually quite insightful, so thank you so much. All right, so unless anyone else has anything else to sort of add, I think we can wrap up the panel. Thank you so much for being here with us today, guys. And thank you as well to the audience for coming to listen.